After only 1 week, merely days after Hiram and Fortisphere were banned, we had a wonderful weekend of tournaments. In this report today, we're going to be covering 7 different events of 30 or more players. And we're going to be talking about some of the best decks from the biggest tournaments of the weekend and how they were successful. Also looking at some of the smaller events and saying, hey, these decks were still there. They were still represented. They still went undefeated. And talking about how well the different in combinations are doing now with the full-time banishment of Hiram Flavorsham and Fortisphere. So without further ado, let's get into it. As you can see here, this is the 7.5 week 1 meta breakdown. And I'm just not even going to say them all out loud. We're going to quickly count them for you guys. 17 different decks. You can see the craziest thing about this is that the idea that just a few weeks ago when we were kind of putting together the meta report, Ruby Sapphire was the most played and most successful deck on the weekend with nearly 30 in top cuts. In this report right here, not a single deck has more than 8. And the majority of them have around the average of 6, which is insane. You can see, obviously, Amethyst Steel mid came out to play. Amethyst Ruby, Emerald Steel, Ruby Sapphire, Sapphire Amethyst. I mean, where this in combination hasn't really even existed in the metagame to this point. So all of a sudden, Hiram gets banned, Fortisphere gets banned, boom, it's back. Amber Steel Songs, boom, it's back. Amber, Amethyst, Midrange. All of a sudden, this deck is out of nowhere, picks up 3 top cuts this past weekend. This meta breakdown, I understand that there's some fans out there, and there's some people that are very, very upset with the banning of Fortisphere and the banning of Hiram, but it is basically impossible to look at this and say, okay, it wasn't the right move. I'm sorry. It just isn't. Like, this is beautiful. This is saying you can literally play whatever you want and have a chance in any scale of tournament. Like, obviously, we talk about the America versus North America, or it's like the North America versus EU, like, and that different metagame. And I won't lie, it's a big difference. In the EU metagame, Amethyst Steel didn't really even exist. Like, honestly, didn't exist. I think in general, like, they just don't like Steel. They would rather prefer Ruby. And I'm not saying that, like, I know for sure. I'm not saying it's gospel. I just say as like someone that really pays attention and looks at the analytics of it all, they just don't seem to like Steel in the same fashion that we like Steel. So maybe that's like a big part. But regardless, it doesn't matter. Like, the bannings were phenomenal, and this is what we got because of it. I'm over the moon excited. If I'm not even like just straight up, like, the idea that we can have this after 1 week, and that's insane. The saddest people on that list, if you guys were looking at it, was there's only one Sapphire Steel list, like, in all of the top 8s and / top 16s that we covered in the video. And that sucks. It does. But, when you can look at it and say, how many of them are 1s and how many of them are 2s, and like the idea that you still have Ruby Sapphire items, you still have a Emerald Sapphire Bend to My Will, you still got Emerald Amethyst mid-range and Amber Steel mid-range and aggro and all those things. You have all of these things going on while the top still mostly remain the same. It just finally wasn't Sapphire dominant. Like, the idea that Ruby Sapphire had 6 is still pretty great. Technically, if we just want to put the items top deck on top, it's 7. So Ruby Sapphire's an in combination really had a good amount. Obviously, Amethyst Steel would have had 10, which is fine. The idea of choice that we now have in Disney Lorcana being this wide truly means that anybody, well, as long as you're not playing Sapphire Steel items currently, anybody can really bring the deck that they want to play and be successful. So with that, of course, we're going to take a look at some of the decks from this past weekend and really break down why they were successful in a Hiram / Fortisphere less metagame. Ruby Amethyst Pan Evasive. This was the deck that I covered last week on decks that are going to get better. Really, Peter Pan was at the #1 card on my list that I thought was going to come out and be prepared to really play some games. And this deck showed its force in week 1. Max here from the Illumination podcast took a top 4 finish at a 57-player 2K at the encounter in Allentown. This deck was great. It played sweet. It won on camera in the top 8. It had to kind of fight its way through the tournament, finishing an X1-1, but was able to get there in top 8. And honestly, even in top 4, positioned itself really well to win the match and kind of just lost to a top deck GOAT. So this deck, very interesting, very powerful. I expect a lot more things from Ruby Amethyst moving forward. I also really expect them almost all to be centered around Peter Pan. I think Peter Pan Shadowfinder is the core to this deck now. And I think that there's plenty of cards that we just no longer really need or required. I don't think Medusa is even that big of a necessity. I think Iago is very powerful and we should be playing more copies of it. I think the Pegasus line is okay, but I'm not crazy about it. And I'm still more on like the Team Genie route than the Team Rabbit route, but I can kind of respect either direction. The other key component missing here, without a shadow of a doubt, is, of course, Maui Shark. Maui Shark with Peter Pan Shadowfinder is one of the best things you can be doing. Very shocked to see that Max didn't already include it in his list. But nonetheless, top 4 finish for Max here. Played very, very well on camera all day. There's a couple matches that you can find over on the channel. So check them out if you're interested in this deck. Emerald Steel Discard picked up a 4th place finish at the 128 player event in Germany. This is one of the more unique versions of Emerald Steel that we're seeing, however. The idea that we now have Clarabelle as a Floodborn option. We now also have the Ariel as a Floodborn option, Tinkerbell, and no Beast. We're choosing Clarabelle over Beast, which in all honesty, for a lot of reasons, I really like. I think it's a very interesting take on this deck. I like the inclusion of the clumsy Clarabelle as well as a way to kind of destroy, banish items. The inclusion to the one of Lucifer is another card that I'm never crazy about, but I understand why the Emerald Steel players kind of hold on to it. But, you know, we're not even going over the top with discard here. There's no Hypnotize. It's just Sudden Chill. It's just, we don't talk about Bruno and Ursula too. You know, there are no Hypnotizes. We still have some room for Coves. Well, obviously, we have Diablo. We have Prince John. We have that whole line, and we're still found a room for 2 Mr. Smee. I think this list is very versatile. I think I'm very interested to see what Emerald Steel does in the coming weeks because, you know, it had a target on its back. This past weekend, I think everybody basically went into the weekend saying, all right, Diablo is now the best card in Disney Lorcana. We're not going to lose to Diablo. And spoilers, not many people did because we found ways to make sure it beat and didn't win many tournaments, if any at all. So because of that, we've already kind of answered as a community how to interact with Diablo. So now Diablo has to figure out, am I actually good enough? Like, can I actually be the correct line in Emerald decks? Or are there other ways that they can build without me? So I think it'll be really interesting as we develop over the next couple weeks because just about every deck that has Amethyst in it found an answer to it. And like even Amber Steel's songs has answers to it. Amber Steel aggro can slot in, you know, its mines and babooms and things like that and kind of answer it. So it'll be really, really interesting to see moving forward how Emerald Steel kind of continues to evolve. If it means like a priority 1 threat, because honestly, if Diablo is the number 1 threat in this metagame, I think there's just so many answers to it that it's really not actually that much of a threat. It's more of just like, hey, this is kind of the card that I'm interested in playing. But we'll see as we kind of move forward and into the further weeks of the metagame leading up to set championships. DKP picked up the 1st place finish at the Questlore event, 128 players in Germany. DKP probably as happy as anyone that Hiram was banned. It's a card that he has always felt obligated to play in this list and really didn't want to play it anymore. This is a deck that we have covered at length in the past before because it's won a Disney Lorcana Challenge. It won another large 128 player plus event, I believe, in Germany as well. So this is a deck that he has basically been playing, you know, for the last 5 months. So it's no shock that he's found success the moment that Hiram was removed. The key components and differences between this list and previous lists are that we went down on our number of goofies. You know, no more 4 super goofs. We also lost Hiram, of course, but what did we gain in replace of them? Well, the first thing is noticeable is that we went back to 4 Sisu. That's right, the Floodborn that comes into play and banishes all characters with 2 strength or less has now made an appearance in this list. It was not a card at all that was played. There are no Sapphire coils to combo with it. It just simply is an 8-cost character that we get to slam, has 3 lore, and it removes some problematic characters along the way, kind of slowing down aggro. Aside from that, we have All Is Found. All Is Found is a remarkable Sapphire card that, since it was printed, is a card that I have thoroughly enjoyed. What he had said in different responses on social media and things like that were that All Is Found were strictly for the Emerald Steel matchup, because he finds that if he has to discard his cards, he won't be able to ink. If he's able to simply pay 5 and put 2 cards that he had to discard from the discard pile into his inkwell, it's a nice way to play off the top of his deck and get 2 cards like Be Prepared and Sisu when necessary. All in all, great showing again for DKP. Nice pickup in the first week after the Hiram ban. And I'm not shocked at all. I said it on Twitter. This makes sense because no one has probably played more games with this deck than DKP himself. One of the first things I had said after the Hiram ban was the decks like Amethyst Sapphire and Emerald Sapphire, that were 2 decks that were not Hiram-eccentric decks, would benefit greatly from the removal of Hiram. Well, as soon as I said that, the very next weekend, Amethyst Sapphire Bounce is back. This deck found its way into 5 top 8s this past weekend, and in this event, we're showcasing the Lore Keepers Showdown, which was a 30-player tournament that it found the top 8 in. Again, we can kind of see the resurgence of a card like Iago. There is no Peter Pan Shadow Finder in this deck, and I do wonder if it will become a mainstay moving forward. But we have the Floodborn Bell to shift on to our Apprentice, of course. And it's a really nice interaction of saying, hey, once again, one of the key factors of this list previously was the idea that it couldn't keep up with aggro very easily. But when all of a sudden you have Bell, you have Crabs, you have Iago, which is a really nice addition, you kind of just get to really answer the board pretty well. And while doing that, have a phenomenal end game. Not to mention singing Friends on the Other Side on turn 2 feels really great on this deck. So even when you don't have to challenge with Bell, we can still sing a pretty great song. And it really just positions yourself very, very well the later the game gets, because it's a free inkable later on that you're not worried about being stuck in your hand. This deck goes all the way to the top heavy version of Elson Spirit Winter and, of course, 80s. This is a deck that just got kind of suppressed because Hiram drew way too many cards. Ruby Sapphire was always its worst matchup because as many times as you can bounce your rabbit and draw those cards and kind of interact with repeating else's and things, you were just simply out card advantage on average. Now, with the removal of Hiram, it's very hard and difficult for any deck to truly out card advantage you that much. Amber Steel Songs picked up the first place victory at the 41-player event at Double Look Games by none other than TFM Ben. TFM Ben was probably as excited as anyone else that Hiram was banned because he did not want to play in a Sapphire metagame. And with that, in the very opening week, he goes and crushes a 41-player tournament with his one and only love for Amber Steel Songs. The particular choices in this deck are to go back to Robin Hood. Robin Hood is a phenomenal card in the game. We have already learned over and over again that 6 willpower on turn 3 is pretty king. We were able to do this in Sapphire decks with our Hiram to draw cards. Amber Steel has the same ability to put a 6 willpower character in play that doesn't necessarily draw cards, but pressures the board incredibly early, removes almost everything in play to that point, and gains 2 lore to the boot. And along with when it is banished, most of the time you get to draw a card and replace itself. The other key additions here are, of course, Miss Bianca and Cinderella Stouthearted. All in all, this is a whole new world deck. I believe this variation will certainly change from time to time. As you can see, we have the 1 Troubadour and 3 Vanessas. We have the 3 Daisy Ducks. We have the wonderful song package of World's Greatest Criminal Mind, Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of Raging Fire, Zeus, and A Whole New World, and the one of Naveen. All in all, this deck is pretty straightforward, and it has not changed that much since the set 4 metagame, if we're being honest. But here we are and looking at it and just saying, hey, a Troubadour is cool, Miss Bianca is cool, Robin Hood is good again, Stouthearted is still phenomenal, all the good things that are coming out of Amber Steel Songs, and I'll be interested to see how this deck kind of continues and moves forward in the new metagame. Speaking of TFM members having success, this past weekend, not 1, not 2, but 3 different members of TFM won their respective tournaments. Nunez won a 57-player tournament. Ben won a 41-player tournament. Dick Burns won a 20-person tournament. All of them really showing up and just immediately reacting to the Hiram ban, going back to their roots and playing decks that they were so comfortable with in previous metagames. really a great thing, because what that does for us is it gives us the content that provides to you saying, hey, you want to hear about these? Go check out the Ultimate Guide. Check out the tournament report from Dick Burns this past weekend. Hopefully TFM Bem is going to get his side of the story as well and sell his kind of influence on Amber Steel songs as well. And then, of course, Amethyst Steel Doc is back. You had the video earlier in the week that you were able to see and showcase. We're going to have even more information on that coming up. So if you're looking to support us, you're looking to get better, get that edge in your local metagame, get ready for set championships, no better place than right here. Check out our Metafy. Amethyst Emerald Discard finds a second place finish at a 55-player tournament, which was also a 2K. This deck picked up a lot of steam recently, and now we're seeing it kind of just continue to move forward. Peter Pan Shadowfinder again showing up in another number here, followed by Iago with Genies, with Elsa's. The one interesting card in this list is the Improvise. I do think that we're, obviously a little bit worried about Amethyst Mirrors. If Iagos are going to be everywhere, maybe Improvise is the quote answer, but it's funny to see the card kind of come up. I also will say that it's notable that the card can +1 on, your Diablo Spiteful Raven. So you can actually turn your Diablo Spiteful Raven into a way to remove a Daisy Duck, which I think is pretty valuable. But aside from that, it's not doing too much, but hey, it is inkable, so it's not hurting you. And when in doubt, it can cycle, it can draw you a card. But all in all, you still are a Prince John deck. You're a Diablo deck. You're trying to get the most advantage as possible and kind of just pressure the game late with some very impactful cards such as Cricky. This deck has continued to pick up steam, but much like Emerald Steel, I'm very curious in how Diablo decks are going to maintain their presence in the metagame. If every deck in the metagame is utilizing the correct amount of removal to interact with Diablo, is it really worth it to try and attempt to get those games where Diablo goes unanswered? I'm not sure. I don't know if the deck actually has all the correct cards to maintain its pressure in the metagame if every deck has a core answer to the specific Devoted Herald. All in all, time will tell, but nice to see a second place finish here early on in the post-Hiram world. Amber Amethyst Tempo picked up a third place finish at the 41-player event at Double Looks Games. This is the deck that is more interesting every single time I look at it. It is a deck that has been truly in the metagame in a way since the Azurite Sea, but not many really picked it up or gave it a true shot. But now with the removal of Hiram, the understanding that Rapunzel is one of the best cards that draws cards again, that Daisy Duck is kind of just insane and she runs away with too many games and has the ability to really lock your opponent out of any game before it ever started. But this deck in particular gives off many different versions and plays into many different decks, all the while being rewarded for your opponent not having a clue as to what you're actually doing. When you start off the game where you have a Daisy into a Lilo, your opponent is likely assuming that you're just some aggro deck. When all of a sudden it turns into a Peter Pan and then Iagos, Genies, Bells, Rabbits, Elsas, they're not normally used to that in this particular ink combination. So while at heart we are, a 47 card Amethyst deck with the nice presence of a few very, very powerful Amber cards, you kind of are a trick of all trades and really get the benefit of catching your opponent off guard. Moving forward in the coming weeks with this deck getting more and more coverage, I'm not sure how true that will be, but that's not taking away from the power and presence that this deck actually does give you. Bell, Rabbit, multiple ways to draw cards off of them. Also having the library, this deck just has a ton of ways to maintain card advantage, which is probably going to be a big factor in the coming weeks in Disney Lorcana. So huge shout out to Aaron here for a sweet finish. And honestly, a huge shout out to Chris Anderson being the lead promoter on this deck on social media everywhere. Philip here picked up the top 16 at the 120-player event this past weekend in Germany with Emerald, Sapphire, Bend to My Will. This is a wonderful deck. I say that in terms of not trying to crack a smile while saying it. Mostly it's wonderful for the owner and not wonderful for its opponent. But the most interesting thing about this deck for me is that I felt that Ruby Sapphire was a matchup that we really enjoyed playing against. But because of the lack of Hiram, I really thought that Bend to My Will would not be the direction for this deck in general that people would navigate towards. However, we see it here. We're still playing the Muse package. We're playing all the bounce cards. we're getting everything to our opponent's hand. We're drawing and refilling with Clarabelle. We now have room for Popsicles, Sapphire Coils, and Obscure to play the Tamatoa Happy as a Clam. We also are introducing Kita to this list. There's just so many new cards that are really intriguing, and it's just a new direction in general being kind of implemented here in a very nice way. I think that All Is Found is a bit criminal in this deck to only be a one of, because I found that early on when I was playing this version of the deck, which wasn't necessarily bend to my will, it was closer to Ink Geyser, the best thing you could be doing is shifting a Clarabelle out there, playing an All Is Found, getting super ahead of your opponent in Inkwell, and also by drawing up to them and matching them. It was such a good play. So for me, if we're really looking to kind of make this deck a little more interesting, a little bit better, I think Kita is pretty mid, and I probably wouldn't play the card at all, and I would just play more copies of All Is Found, which does make us a little bit more weaker to board presence and a little more reliant on the muses, but, you know, they can't always have Pete, Games Referee. Am I right? Amber Ruby Mufasa. I felt incredibly obligated to put this one on screen today because I did put it in the D tier in our live stream last weekend, and I really wasn't questioning that. And hey, it came out there. It picked up a first place finish in a 44-player tournament. And yeah, it's just Amber Ruby Mufasa. Does it have some new and cool tricks? Sure, it does. You know, is it relying on Mulan and Prince Eric and Teeth and Ambitions? Cards like Lady Tremaine, Madame Medusa, all the tricks of the trade here, all the way up to Sisu, and of course the one of Chernobog. This deck is just 56 characters with a few Brawl and a few Teeth and Ambitions, which are all interesting answers, again, to Diablo. So even a deck that basically by nature has very little answers to Diablo is still committing to playing 4 answers to them, along with, of course, some bigger cards such as Madame Medusa and Lady Tremaine. And of course, you know, when done correctly, Prince Eric also can. Also, a Mulan shift can do it. So, like, it has all these different interactions as well, but it still was saying, like, hey, I don't need 60 characters. I'll play a couple of these just in case. I don't really know how truthful this deck is, but I do love the ambitions to playing it in week 1 and saying, hey, I'm going to put dudes in the table while you're trying to figure out what's going on. And if you can't, I'm just going to win the game. I do have a lot of respect for that in a big way. It's nice to see some of these cards come back and some of the Mufasa lovers out there getting a true enjoyment out of the Amber Ruby combination again. Last but not least is the Amethyst Steel Doc 1, the 57-player 2K with TFM Nunez. This deck is still one of the best decks in the metagame, in my humble opinion. I think it is absolutely a mainstay. And if you want to hear even more about this list, then I definitely would click this video right here on screen. Check out, we did a full podcast on it. Nunez and I broke it all down in that video. So if you want to hear even more, click on that. Thanks again for watching, everyone. If you haven't yet, hit that like button for me. Comment below what you're playing in the post Hiram ban.